This edition of the Platforum is brought to you by Roomettes, the fastest way to create the illusion of 3D interiors in your model railroad structures. And by Nix Trains, home of the Decoder Buddy. When it comes to making DCC decoder installations and upgrades easy, Decoder Buddy is your best friend.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Platforum, the podcast for the railfan and the model railroader alike. We are coming to you from the north shore of Lake Ontario, somewhere between Toronto and Montreal, on a very busy rail corridor, hosting between 40 and 50 trains a day of both the passenger and freight variety. In addition to our 3 studio cameras, we also have a Railstream webcam that's attached to our station, affording us a panoramic view of all of the train action that goes by here. You know, the neat thing about that camera is that it never blinks. And if you're interested in taking in all of those 40 to 50 trains a day, if you have that kind of time and interest, you can visit our friends at Railstream at railstream.net, and you can tie into that camera and see all the trains that we see as well. And of course, we're hoping that the trains will come by and see us today. And if that should happen, it's a welcomed interruption. We'll simply swing the camera away and we'll railfan in real time with you and with us here. My guest today has been in the railroad game for 36 years. He has been an operator, he has been a dispatcher, and now he is an RTZ. He's simply known as JZ around Metrolinx. His name is Joe Zika. Joe, welcome to the Platform.
Thank you, Bob. Glad to be here.
It is not the warmest day.
It's not bad. A little cool, but the sun helps.
You got an office job, man. You're used to sitting inside looking at computer screens under fluorescent lights. So,
yes.
But you're a hardy railroader nonetheless. Joe, we've just gotten started and already the crossing bells are ringing, and our second guest, the railway itself, is about to make an appearance. Let's see what we got here. I hear a rumble. P42 leading, F40 trailing. I can't think of a better way to open the show.
Sounds good to me.
Joe, welcome here. I alluded to the fact that you began your railroad career in 1984. Before we get to that fateful day when you decided to hire out with the railroad, tell us a little bit about Joe Zika, where's home, where you came from, where you grew up, and how you came to want to apply for a job at the railway.
Well, I was born in Europe, in the Czech Republic. We left there in 60, like a lot of other Czechs did at the time. We came to Canada. My dad thought that Canada would be a great place for us kids to grow up. We definitely have more opportunities, so we came to Canada. And
1960?
Yeah, 68 actually.
68?
Yeah, and when we came to Canada, we went out west to Medicine Hat. There wasn't much work there, so we came back to Ontario. My parents, my dad in particular, thought it'd be a better job opportunity there, and we lived in St. Thomas for a couple of years, and the work was okay, but my mom wanted to move to Ottawa for some reason, so we ended up moving to Ottawa, and he got a good job at the University of Ottawa there.
Your dad worked at U of Ottawa, or
yeah,
Ottawa U? Yeah.
Yeah, he worked there, and we had a little farm just east of Ottawa where I grew up, so part-time farmer too. And after finishing school, I decided I had a couple of options. My dad wanted me to get into engineering at the university, and I always had a passion for trains. So on a whim, I sent out a couple of applications. After growing up in St. Thomas and the schoolyard being right on the KSO main, the trains always going by. Trains have always been part of my life. They've always been in it. So when we came up to Ottawa and when we moved here, and after I finished school, I figured, you know what, I'll try it. You know, I'll put out a couple of applications. I sent an application to CP. I want to become an engineer eventually, and at that time they weren't hiring anybody. So
you originally had your sets on running trades?
Running trades, exactly. And at that time I was just new to the whole industry, so that was what was familiar to me. So
sure.
I said, well, let's try that. I wasn't being too picky or anything like that.
And what little boy doesn't stand trackside wanting to drive the train someday.
Exactly.
I think we're all in that boat.
Yeah, exactly. You're growing up as a kid, and you just want to be part of that one day. It's like a dream for everybody, and so I sent an application to CP, and they sent me back a nice letter. We're not hiring at the moment, this or that. They did give me a contact, and I went to pay him a visit, and he said, well, you know what, although we're not hiring, go talk to CN literally across the tracks. This was in Ottawa at Walkley Yard. So they said they always hire for the summer, so if you want to get started on the railroad, maybe they can find you a position or something. So I did, and I filled out a job application, and they mailed it off through the company mail, and I went back to my part-time job at the time.
As a security guard?
As a security guard, yeah. The school it hadn't started yet, so I had a little bit of time to play, and with the work on the farm and that, I had a bit of spare time. So I was doing that, and I got a phone call, and they said, come on down for an interview, and this was at Administration Avenue, 380 Terminal Avenue, right beside the post office. So I went on my lunch break and went for an interview. Exactly, walked over and did the interview, and went back, and about a week or two later I got a phone call. He says, yeah, come to Montreal and come do your medical and this and that, and we briefly discussed what was available for options, and at that time CN wasn't looking for anybody in the running trades, but they were looking for operators. And do you know what an operator does? I said, no, but I'm pretty sure that I'll find out.
So I was going to ask you that. So we're talking 1984 at this point, and
the end of 83.
End of 83 into 84. So when you applied for at CN in Ottawa, you just filled out, hey, I want to come work for you. There really wasn't any specific job you were applying for. It was just, I want to work for the railways. Was it that open?
It was a basic application, and on there they did ask you, what position you were looking for, what you had in mind, type of thing. And I put a locomotive engineer on there, and basically that's really all that I had knowledge of. Because
I have three options: engineer, and engineer.
I just put engineer, but like I say, I wasn't too picky.
So you just wanted to be a part of the family.
Yeah, I was just looking for a new career, something on the railroad, and so they got back to me, and they were looking for operators, like I was mentioning there, and I said, you know what, I'm not going to be picky or anything. So I said, yeah, sure, I'd love to check it out and explore it, see what it's all about, and that, and. So that's the direction that I went, and
so you got hired as an operator.
Yeah, hired as an operator. At that time, CN was transferring the Beachburg sub from the Great Lakes region, from Cape Breton to Montreal, and they wanted some people in Ottawa just to look after the Beachburg sub. So at that time, bilingualism, you didn't really need to be bilingual because it was an English territory. Yeah. So I just happened to luck out there. They were looking for 2 operators, and they had 2 that came from Cape Breton. They were looking for 2 more, and so basically that's I started my training. They sat me in with the various other operators. They taught me the ropes at the various stations and that. You did a couple road trips, you trained at all the stations and that, and during that time you did your medical and your rules class and all that stuff, and then you got your in-house training, and that lasted for a couple of months. And
where did all this training take place?
Usually we did some in Montreal, like the medical, and some of it was in Montreal, some of it was in Ottawa, depending on where the rules classes were available and all that.
So when they assigned you, they said, Joe, welcome aboard, you're going to be an operator. At that time, you had no clue what an operator was or what an operator did. Is that correct?
Exactly.
So how high was your anxiety at that point?
It wasn't too bad. I was still young and I was up for the challenge. So it's like, okay, let's do this.
Sounds good. What is that?
Yeah, it's exactly. It sounded great. So I said, I'm happy, you know. I'm on the railroad. I'm
Yep.
around trains, so
Mission
it's like,
accomplished.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So that,
So I want to come back and talk and squirrel in and dig a little meat off the bone as to each of your positions. But let's do a survey first. So you were an operator out of Walkley Yard
Yeah.
in Ottawa and different stations along the Beachburg sub.
Right.
And for those who aren't familiar with the historic Beachburg sub, just in general terms, where did it run from and to?
The Beachburg sub ran from Ottawa, from Walkley Yard, and it ran in a northwest direction through Pembroke, through the Algonquin Park, through Brent, Ontario, which was a crew change for the railroad, and then it eventually ran through North Bay as the Alderdale sub, and it ran through to Cape Rail. So that was kind of part of the CN's transcontinental bypassing the Toronto end.
So would it be safe to say that it was sort of CN's version of CP's old Chalk River sub?
Exactly.
Sort
yeah.
of the
it was
equivalent.
parallel, kind of sort of parallel to the Chalk River sub, because the Chalk River sub ran along the river,
Yeah.
and CN had a more direct approach right through the
Yeah.
park.
Okay. So in '84 you hire on, you become an operator along the Beachburg, and again we'll come back and pick meat off that bone. And so then you were transferred, and you became an operator where?
Well, what happened in after a couple of years, CN was looking to get rid of train orders, so they were going to implement MBS, manual block system, and at that time, you know, there was talk going around they were going to get rid of the operators and give the duties of copying orders to the train crews.
Because manual block is radio dispatching, right?
Right.
Radio clearances,
Yeah.
right from the dispatcher to the train.
Direct to the train.
So
yeah.
the operator position becomes redundant at
Yeah,
that point.
for the first year or so, we were copying the bulletins, the manual MBS bulletins for the train crews, handing them up to the train crews, much like train orders.
Yeah.
Type of scenario, and once the crews became comfortable with it, our positions were redundant.
That was just a transition period.
Yeah, exactly. So they so during that time when I seen the MBS come in, and I realized that, okay, I don't speak French, so going to Montreal is not going to be really much of an option. So I started exploring other options, and Toronto at that time, part of the Great Lakes region, they were looking for dispatchers, train dispatchers. What we call RTCs now, Rail Traffic Controllers. So back then I put in an application for a dispatching job, and I had to wait for the Great Lakes region proper people to put in their bids, and after they didn't have enough, so they opened it up system-wide.
Everything's seniority driven on the
Everything
railroad.
is seniority driven, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's exactly what I did. So I sent in another application, and they accepted it, and so they sent me down to Toronto and gave me the show of the office, and enlightened me a little bit about what dispatching is all about. And then they started the whole training program. Some of it was in-house. We did spend some time. They did send us out to Gimli, Manitoba, where CN had their the training center where they taught locomotive engineers, basically everybody. And so we spent some time out in Gimli, and then came back to Toronto, and then they fine-tuned everything, and that's where I started my career in '89 as a dispatcher in Toronto.
Okay. Office at that time.
At that time, it was downtown, right by the CN Tower. It's 277 Front Street is where it was.
So you're right in the thick of things.
Right in the heart of the city.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was that a little bit of a culture shock for you?
It was a little different for
Coming from the farm
for
outside
a small
Ottawa?
town boy. Came from a quieter city like Ottawa, and then you get to Toronto into the hustle and bustle, and where the city never sleeps. It took a little bit of adjusting, but I think in the long run it was a good experience, because it really opened your eyes up.
So
as to
from
what's
'89 you become a dispatcher, or what's known today as a rail traffic controller,
Exactly,
RTC. By the way, when did that terminology switch over, would you say? Because old school we say dispatcher, and
Yeah.
now everything's rail traffic controller. When would you say that
I
terminology
think that started
switched?
around the mid-90s. They were readjusting the rule book, making some changes to the rule book and terminology, and they wanted a little more up to date.
So it's not necessarily a UCOR versus CROR thing.
It came in coincidentally with the new rule book.
Okay.
exactly. So they wanted to, you know,
update the term.
yeah, an updated term,
Yeah.
as opposed to, you know, being too old. You just
Because
wanted
now, by the mid-90s, everything is dispatching center or the control center to
Yeah.
the train via radio.
right.
So you really are much like an air traffic controller. It's
Yeah,
rail.
on a two-dimensional plane.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
exactly.
So in '89, you become a then called dispatcher at Front Street by the CN Tower for CN.
Yeah.
And then how long did that career last?
That career pretty well lasted me. They did move the office from downtown, from 277 Front Street. They did move it up to CN's McMillan Yard in Concord. That was early 2000s, somewhere in there. I forget exactly the date on it. They did open a new office there. They just wanted to centralize operations and probably avoid the lease of the property downtown and that. So, which I can see, you know, from a business standpoint.
Must have been huge dollars.
Yeah, like everything, it's, you know, it is, because at that time we went to a new dispatching system from the RTC1 to an RTC2, so it was more computer-based as opposed to the old machines, the CTC machines, the RTC1 that we had downtown. So it was more modular and...
So they used the move as an opportunity to sort of start fresh and build a facility that was to RTC2 standards.
Yeah, exactly. With them implementing that system and being very modular, they can move it around and change desks, add desks, whatever the operation required at the time. So I lasted with that job until up until February of this year, 2020, when CN decided they were going to close the Toronto office, and they moved it to Montreal. So after 35 years, I decided, you know what, I'm not really crazy about going to Montreal. So I says, I'll take my pension, please. So
waiter, I'll have my pension.
Yeah, and that's basically what happened. At that time, Metrolinx was in the picture. They were acquiring their territory for their operation in Toronto, and as luck would have it, quite a few of us went from the CN office. We migrated over to Metrolinx. Metrolinx was quite happy to have us come aboard, and because for them it was almost a seamless operation to get people where they're already trained, they already know the operation, the system, everything. Because we are still, until we develop our own system at Metrolinx, they are, we were still using the CN system. CN gave Metrolinx license to use their RTC2 and that. So it was a seamless transition, and I don't think anybody in Toronto even noticed the transition from one office to the other. It was just almost like flicking a switch.
So in February, CN says, Joe, if you want to stay with us, you're going to Montreal. Joe says, pension, please. And then you jump over to Metrolinx. And for those in our audience who are not familiar with Metrolinx, and Joe, correct me if I get this wrong, I'm going to try. But I'm good at getting things wrong. So you jump in if I get this wrong. Metrolinx is the operating ministry or organization of the province of Ontario, the government of the province of Ontario. It's an agency that runs the GO trains, the commuter trains that run in and around the Greater Toronto area. Do I have that right?
Yeah. Not only do they run the GO Transit trains, they also look after the bus operations. And as well as they're slowly getting into other light rail transit systems in and around Toronto in conjunction with other like TTC and that, where it's one great big transit system. Toronto's transit system is basically
so to put it simply
into.
and plainly for those who maybe are not local, you're dispatching GO trains.
Basically, yeah. From my perspective, my hands-on, that's exactly
what you're doing.
So I went from CN freight trains, where we looked after the GO trains for Metrolinx. GO Transit at the time, and then it became Metrolinx. So we looked after the GO trains. We also look after the VIA trains for VIA on the Kingston, Oakville subs on the corridors. And now my main function is to look after the GO trains, working under Metrolinx. And we still look after the VIA trains, and we still accommodate CN for their road switchers that have to serve the customers and that on the Metrolinx territory. So it's basically the same job, a rail traffic controller. You just relocated to a new office, new company.
You've come a long way from hiring on as an operator
Yeah.
in 1984. I just think of the technological changes that have happened over the last 36 years are mind-boggling as it relates to how to operate a railroad.
It has changed significantly. Computers, technology has played a huge role in it. Some of it is streamlining of operation, reduction of workforces, but it has come a long way from when I hired on as an operator, copying train orders and my little dabbling with MBS, and then moving on to dispatching and the actual CTC control, centralized traffic control, looking after the trains, and it has changed considerably. We've gone through the transition from cabooses to no cabooses to from full-man crews to two-man crews, and right now they're developing the positive train control, the train separation.
Has that come to Canada?
They're working on it. They're developing it. They're still in the development stage, and they're making progress. I think a lot of it is driven by the railroads in the United States, and we're just keeping up with them. And because eventually, I think for companies like CN and CP, it is going to be probably a requirement.
They have a foot in each country.
Yeah, so for them to operate seamlessly over the border, that they're going to need to get on the bandwagon, as they say.
While we've mentioned PTC, or positive train control, can you tell our audience the Coles Notes version of what PTC is, without getting into the intricacies of it?
Basically, positive train control or train separation. It's a computer oversees the movement of trains, so the trains don't get too close to each other, so you don't have inadvertent things like collisions, whether it's rear end or head on, due to human error.
And so I can hear somebody in the audience saying, well, isn't that what the wayside signal system is for?
It is. The signal system is very. It's a capable system. It's very good, but this positive train control, it helps to eliminate the human error part of it. So whether it's due to fatigue or mechanical failure.
So if a train crew fell asleep in a locomotive, this thing would take over and not allow that train to run a red.
Well, exactly. It'll monitor the distance, the spacing of the trains, and it'll basically oversee the signal system and say, okay, you're coming up to an approach, an advance clear to stop, and it's going to monitor, and in a nutshell, it'll make sure that the train brakes go on before the train goes by a red signal.
More and more technology all the time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's very heavily computer driven, and like I say, I'm not an expert on it, but that's the direction that it's heading to right now, and eventually it'll probably cut back on some jobs in the future as the system gets implemented.
Well, let's rewind that technological tape and go back to 1984 in Ottawa, Ontario, when a young Joe Zika is a newly minted operator with Canadian National Railways. What was your first station posting, and tell us a little bit about those first days as an operator, duties, where you were, and what a typical day might have looked like?
Well, it's at that time Walkley Yard in Ottawa, CN's Walkley Yard, that was my home terminal. That's what I called home, and as a spare operator, not only did I work at Walkley Yard, the various shifts there, but I was also required to work online at the various stations online, which belonged to Walkley Yard.
Along the Beachburg?
Along the Beachburg, so predominantly because that's where the train order offices are, where we had Portage de Fort, we had Pembroke, we had Lake Travers, and those were the ones that belonged to Walkley Yard. Brent belonged to the Great Lakes region, Cape Real.
That's a different labor pool because it's a different division.
Yeah, a different territory,
Yeah.
Great Lakes versus the St. Lawrence region. So for those 4 offices, like I said, there was only 4 operators, and we had the regular guys that worked the stations. We basically filled in for things like vacations.
Just like a conductor's spare board, or
or
an
a
engineman's
spare board,
board.
just to fill in wherever we were needed.
It's like the substitute teacher model.
Yeah,
The regular teacher's homesick today. You call a supply teacher, and in goes Joe.
Yeah, exactly. We had the Montreal office looked after that, and they called you. We made arrangements. They told you where you needed to go and where they wanted you, and you made arrangements to show up at the job to protect it. So it was a seamless operation. My first job, actually, before I even got to work a station job, it was copying train orders on a rail grinder. At that time, it was a Spino rail grinder, and
that was your first job?
That was my first job. Yeah, I was required to report at Ottawa Station, the passenger station where they tied the Spino rail grinder up, and I think it was like a 6 o'clock start or something like that, and I was supposed to check in with the operator there and pick up my envelope, and it was a pad of train orders and a pad of clearances.
And this is 0600. This is AM.
Yeah, 6 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And at that time, the Spino trains, the rail grinders, or low-ram, what everybody's used to now. At that time, Spino didn't have their own locomotives. The host railroad supplied a locomotive. And at that time, CN provided a brand spanking new SD40-2 wide cab. It was
brand new one.
Brand new one, made for coal train service out west. It had the vapor pace setter control, so it can crawl along at a couple of miles an hour.
Because of the pace setter controls.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it was an experience. First time on a train. At that time, it was still a learning experience. So when I got on there, the crew that was on there, everybody on the railroad was most gracious. They had a genuine interest in teaching and to help you learn. I mean, that's where I learned how to use radios and what buttons to push to tone the dispatcher and that. So I'm sure they got a great laugh out of that, watching this kid learn all this stuff. It's like, how do I do this?
Yeah. Last week I was milking a cow on the farm, and this week Now, as an operator with the rail grinder, were you riding the grinder train?
Yeah.
So you rode the train?
Yeah.
Okay. Because when most people think of an operator, they think of someone sitting at a desk at a station.
No.
This assignment was mobile.
Yeah. There were a few opportunities over my early career to work trains where you ride with the crew, and wherever you needed, orders, or if orders need to be changed, like your work clearance needed to be changed, or you copied the orders for the train crew. So the rail grinder at that time rode on the tail end. I think we had a caboose back then, if I'm not mistaken, because I remember having to walk when we were on. At first, he'd get the regular orders leaving Ottawa up to Pembroke and that, and I remember having to trudge through like 3 feet of snow in the park to get up to the head end to use the radio, because the caboose radio wasn't that good. And at some points the snow was too deep where I had to actually walk through the rail grinder train. Everybody's covered in soot from the grinding stones and everything else.
Don't wear white on the rail grinder.
You definitely don't want to wear white. So that was my first job, was the rail grinder, and it was quite a nice experience. And
back in those days, Joe, like in '84 and '85, what was the daily traffic like on the Beachburg? Like, once you got into a station assignment, were you busy, or?
It wasn't overly busy. The Beachburg sub train order wise, it did have scheduled trains going east. There was 890, 892, and 894. Those are scheduled. Westward trains were extra trains, and then depending on who your dispatcher was, some guys just fixed the train up with a run order, run Nepean to Pembroke or Nepean to Brent, and then they left the onus on the train crew to clear the regular scheduled trains at a siding.
This is all single track.
This is all single track siding territory.
Sidings,
yeah. And there's other dispatchers that would, set up the meets for you, run from Nepean to, Portage de Fort, take siding Portage de Fort, where you'd meet another train. Sometimes they ran the regular trains, sections, depending on the traffic. Like grain train season was, they used to run extra trains, and the odd time they'd even run an extra eastbound if there was no room in the schedule. At that time too, the Beachburg sub in train hour territory, there was lineups in effect, so you had to protect the lineups for all the sectionmen and everybody that had to get out onto the
Passenger
track.
trains or no?
There was no passenger trains on the Beachburg.
All
at that
freight.
time, the Canadian ran on the CP through Chalk River at that time,
And no via service on the Beachburg.
no via service on the once upon a time there was, but when I hired on in '84, the passenger service wasn't there yet.
So here you are out at an outlying station. Did you ever work one of the stations in the park, in Algonquin
Yeah,
Park?
Lake Travers.
Must have been beautiful.
It was beautiful. It was very quiet though.
Yeah.
On average, the Beachburg sub had 4 regular trains. 2:01 in the morning going west. That was your hot train, followed by 3:37 later. And going east was 2:14. That was the equivalent going east. And then I believe it was the 3:38 was the other, regular freight type of thing. So you had your 4 trains a day, 2 each way. So it wasn't an overly busy.
And how long was your trick?
That one there, Lake Travers, that was a day shift only job. It was an 8 to 4 from not 800 to 1600, and then the rest of the time you had to yourself. So
what did you do during your downtime?
Well,
it should be said you're a model railroader too.
Yes.
We haven't touched on that yet.
Yeah.
Did that ever come into play at work?
I did have some quiet time where I took the opportunity to work on a couple models here and there.
I would say that's work related.
It is work related, yeah. I do recall one day when the superintendent brought up a new train master to tour the territory, and I was at my desk. There was nothing going on, wasn't expecting any trains, so I broke out a couple of models on the spare desk in the back of the office, and I was working away at them, and all of a sudden the superintendent shows up with the train master, and I'm sure they were surprised to see me working on trains. Mind you, there were CN units that I was working on.
Yeah,
so
well, there you go.
It was kind of company,
Had that have been
had
CP equipment, you'd have been walking.
I might have been, I might have a bit of explaining to do, but yeah, I do model. I got into modeling just before. Like every kid, your parents buy you a train set one day for Christmas one year, and it kind of developed from there. And at that time, I was living in the country on a farm. You didn't have opportunities to visit the hobby shop on a regular basis. So every once in a while I'd catch a ride with my dad to work, and I'd spend the day, wandered, to the hobby house. And I think there was 2 there in Ottawa, Hobbyland on O'Connor Street, and the other one was Hobby House, and I think they were down on Rideau Street, and they've changed location, I think, once. But so that's what I used to do every once in a while, but once a month or every 2 months I used to catch a ride. And
what style of hoop did you use back then? Was it the ring, or was it the Y-shaped fork?
We used Y. The ones on CN that we had at the offices, we used the Y type hoop. So you just basically copied your orders, you put your clearance on it, stapled it together, and wrapped it up, and you put it in your strings. Usually we use double strings because the single would always snap. And you tie it in there, you string it into your Y hoop, and you do 2, one for the head end, one for the tail end. The head end you had the long stick, the long shaft to reach up to the cab. And then for the tail end, you had a shorter one where the guy was just on the
van steps.
On the van, yeah. Usually the brakeman with the conductor overseeing the thing, and so
now
they were a lot closer. So.
Now, were the hoggers and the conductors kind to you? Did they leave the hoop relatively close to the station?
Well, the Y type, they didn't snag the hoop. They just snagged the orders out. So
but that always worked properly?
At first you had to get a little bit of practice to judge
stories.
your distance, especially when the head end's coming up to you, because you don't want to be too close, because if your hoop got too close to the cab, it would hit the edge of the cab and the orders would bounce out and it would snap, right?
Yeah.
So at first you had to judge your distance. You didn't want to be too shy, because you don't want the poor hogger hanging out, falling out of his seat trying to snag the orders.
Yeah.
So it took a little bit of practice at first to get your distance.
But they were designed to break away. So he would put his arm through the string and take the string with him, leaving you with the hoop.
Yeah. Usually what you did is if you're looking at the train, you try to angle the hoop a little bit away, so as the engineer puts his arm through it, so it doesn't smash the hoop, and so he doesn't get hurt in the process, you know, getting whacked by a hoop. Most of the guys slow down a little bit too, so you know, just to ensure that they were able to get the orders. And,
I'd imagine the tail end would be a little easier. You're dealing with a
the
shorter
tail end's a
distance
little easier.
lower elevation.
What you had to watch out for when you watch a train, when you got the caboose coming up, is you have to watch out for things hanging out the sides of the cars, like 2x4s. Banding iron was a particularly wicked one, like all the old
off a lumber load or something.
Yeah, like the operators say, don't get too close to that thing until the caboose comes up, and then, you know, make your way closer, and then once the caboose is in sight and you don't see any banding iron or whatever, you know, then approach the caboose so you can hoop it up to them. And like they always said, if you see something catches your eye glinting off the sun or something, back up, because you know that's a piece of banding iron coming at you. So there was a lot of good words of wisdom from the older guys that they taught us well. And so the wide type orders, train order hoops, they were actually pretty good. They lasted quite a long time too, if you knew what you were doing. They didn't self-destruct. Every once in a while you had to tighten the little screws on the binder part of it, but it was an art form, but it was good.
Joe, I want to get into more of your dispatching career. I'm going to have you back another time to talk about that. But before we go today, tell us a little bit about your model railroading interests and sort of the scale you're working in and what you're up to.
I model in HO scale. Part of that is the first train set I got that my dad bought me. It was one of those Ather and Cox train sets, Santa Fe F7A and B unit, and a handful of cars.
Classic.
So, yeah. It was pretty. At that time, that's what I stuck with, because that's what I started out with. And over the years, you know, I picked up. At that time, everything was still, I'd say, maybe in its infancy compared to what's available today. So I basically just stuck with what caught my eye and what was readily available. So I decided, as nice as it is to model, you know, prototype specific, I found that it didn't quite do it for me. So I started. As I was reading the magazines, I was looking at some of the proto freelance layouts that were out there, like Jim Hediger's Ohio Southern, and the Virginia Ohio from Alan McClellan, and that, and Tony Coaster's Allegheny Midland, I think it was.
Allegheny
Virginia Midland. I was looking at those layouts and I was just like, wow, this is fantastic. So that kind of set me in the path that I'm on now, where I decided on proto freelance. So I do model HO scale, and my proto freelance road, I called the St. Lawrence systems, partially because that's where I started on CN, on the St. Lawrence region.
Yeah.
And it's like, it kind of goes hand in hand.
It's an homage to the early days of being in Ottawa.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where I model roughly as Eastern Ontario, Ottawa to south of Montreal through Cornwall. And I got a branch down towards Cardinal where I'm going to probably interchange Conrail, have Conrail.
Has the DCC and sound bug bitten you?
Oh yes, it has. Yeah, the DC was nice. The wiring of blocks and all that. It's nice to take an engine out, you know, out of the box and put on track and run it. But as the DCC systems came out, and I said, yeah, I definitely like the sound part of it, and the DCC part where you don't have to block wire your layout. It's very nice. It's been very entertaining, enticing, and so I've been slowly migrating towards that. And over the years, there's been much progress in the HO model industry.
Oh, has there ever?
In terms of especially Canadian prototypes.
Yeah.
And
these are the golden years, my friend.
Yes,
for
they
Canadian modelers.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And now you can get, you know, basically museum quality equipment right out of the box, and even with sound. I know it's pricey for a lot, and a lot of people still, you know, shy away from it just from the price perspective. But I use the Digitrax system because a couple of friends were using that at the time.
I do as well.
Yeah, at that time I didn't have too much exposure to the like the NC and that, and Digitrax was one of the new ones, so I just stuck with that. I bought a system, and I've slowly, been adding to it, and as the decoders and that is, technology comes along, and it's getting better and better. So
once that sound bug bites, it's hard to get away from it.
It's hard to get away from it.
Yeah.
And
I remember a quote I often use from Tony Custer, speaking of the Allegheny Midland.
Yeah.
Tony Custer once said, "No sound, no railroad," and I can't agree more. It's added a completely different dimension.
It is
to the models. Joe, let me ask you this: are you having fun with the model railroad?
Absolutely, when I have time for it, because real railroading and model railroading, the model railroading has to take a back seat. I mean,
unfortunately,
I got to pay for it
exactly.
somehow, right? So
well, you've got a pension and you've got a paycheck, so
yeah,
you got all kinds of money for fancy toys.
Yeah, still got to save up for a nice basement to put everything in, but it is a work in progress. So yeah, like I say, the proto freelance, it's nice. It gives me something to do. It's a creative outlet. It's a nice stress reducer, especially after a busy, stressful day at work.
I bet.
It's a good way to unwind, and
yeah.
And I think proto freelance too, the advantage is you don't have to be a nut and bolt counter. You can have people come over and they can't, well, this isn't quite right or that isn't quite right. It's like, my railroad, I'm gonna have fun and I'm gonna enjoy it.
Yeah.
And, enjoy it as well.
Some of my favorite model railroads were proto freelance: Utah Belt, Virginia and Ohio, and the Allegheny Midland.
Yeah.
Joe, I want to thank you very much for bearing the chilly climbs today on the platform. Our second guest made one appearance.
My pleasure.
In the form of a VIA train. And Joe, I hope you'll come back and talk to us again about dispatching for CN.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome.
If you've watched every single episode of the platform on YouTube and you still want more, I have good news for you. You can download Spotify on your tablet, on your laptop, on your smartphone. And if you do that, you can also then search for the platform. We have the Station House audio series there, and it'll give you multiple episodes that are audio format. You can download them, and you'll find all of that on Spotify. Also, for some behind the scenes footage and some extra photos and videos, be sure to check us out on Facebook at The Platform. Thank you so much. I'm Bob Fallowfield. We'll see you next time right here on The Platform.